I watched my mother-in-law, Patricia, push the carefully prepared garlic bread to the far edge of her plate like it might spontaneously combust. Her theatrical sigh echoed across our dining room as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the same performance I'd witnessed at every family dinner for the past 3 years. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said, her voice dripping with martyred sweetness. "You know how my severe garlic allergy affects me. Even the smell makes my throat close up." I forced a smile and began clearing the untouched bread from the table. "Of course, Patricia." I completely forgot again. But I hadn't forgotten. I never forgot. In fact, I'd spent the entire afternoon making 2 separate versions of everything, one with garlic for the rest of us, and one completely garlic-free for her. The garlic-free bread sat warming in the kitchen, golden and perfect, waiting for her approval that would never come. My husband Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mom really appreciates how accommodating you've been, don't you, Mom?" Patricia nodded solemnly, pressing the tissue to her nose. "It means the world to me. So many people don't understand how serious food allergies can be. Why, just last week at the grocery store, I nearly had a reaction just walking past the Italian seasoning aisle." I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to fetch the safe bread, but really to grip the counter and count to 10. 3 years. 3 years of this elaborate dance, of double cooking everything, of watching her inspect every dish with the scrutiny of a forensic scientist. 3 years of feeling like I was failing as a daughter-in-law because I couldn't remember to cook properly for her. The thing was, I'd tried everything. I'd bought special garlic-free seasonings that cost 3 times as much as regular ones. I'd learned to cook with shallots and fennel to approximate the flavors she was missing out on. I'd even bought a separate set of cooking utensils so there would be no cross-contamination. But nothing was ever quite right. "The shallots have a metallic aftertaste," she'd say, or "I think there might be garlic powder in that pre-made seasoning blend." There was always something wrong, always some reason why my cooking wasn't suitable for her delicate constitution. The worst part wasn't the extra work or the expense. It was the way she made me feel like I was actively trying to poison her. Every meal became a minefield where one wrong ingredient could trigger what she described as potentially life-threatening anaphylaxis. I'd started having anxiety dreams about accidentally killing my mother-in-law with a rogue clove of garlic. Mark tried to be supportive, but I could see the strain it put on him too. He was caught between his wife and his mother, and Patricia had a particular gift for making him feel guilty about any suggestion that her needs might be unreasonable. She raised me by herself after Dad died. He'd remind me whenever I seemed frustrated. "She's been through so much. If avoiding garlic makes her feel safe and included, isn't that worth a little extra effort?" Of course it was worth it. That's what made the whole situation so maddening. I wanted to be the daughter-in-law who bent over backward to accommodate family needs. I wanted to be the woman who lovingly prepared special meals and made everyone feel welcome at our table. But somehow, with Patricia, I always felt like I was falling short. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in October. Mark was working late, and I'd impulsively decided to try a new Indian restaurant that had opened downtown. I'd been craving their lamb curry for weeks, but I'd avoided going because Patricia often joined us for weeknight dinners, and Indian food was obviously out of the question with her garlic situation. But Mark was tied up with a client until at least 9, and Patricia hadn't mentioned coming over, so I threw caution to the wind and ordered takeout. I was just settling in with my curry and a glass of wine, ready to watch some mindless Netflix, when I heard the familiar sound of Patricia's key in our front door. Mark had given her a spare key for emergencies, but Patricia had a rather broad definition of what constituted an emergency. Running out of her special herbal tea was an emergency. Needing to borrow our good scissors was an emergency. Wanting to drop off a newspaper clipping she thought we'd find interesting was definitely an emergency. "Yoo-hoo, just me," she called, as she always did, as if the key in the door announcement wasn't sufficient warning. I frantically started to hide my takeout containers, but it was too late. The rich, garlicky aroma of the curry had already permeated our small living room. I braced myself for the dramatic reaction, the coughing, the watery eyes, the hasty retreat to safer air. But Patricia just stood there in our doorway, sniffing appreciatively. Oh my goodness, that smells divine. What are you eating? I stared at her, confused. It's Indian food. From that new place on 5th Street. But you should probably, there's definitely garlic in this, so maybe you want to… Garlic. Patricia waved her hand dismissively and walked closer to my coffee table, where the containers sat open. Oh, don't worry about me, dear. A little bit in the air won't hurt anything. I watched in stunned silence as she leaned over my curry and inhaled deeply. That really does smell incredible. You know, I used to love Indian food before my allergy developed. What did you order? Lamb curry, I managed to say, still trying to process what I was witnessing. And garlic naan. And, Patricia, are you sure you should be this close to it? You always say even the smell. Oh, that's only when I eat it, silly girl, she interrupted with a laugh. Smelling it is perfectly fine. In fact, I think I'll sit here with you for a bit. Mark won't be home for hours, and I hate eating alone. She settled herself on our couch, not 3 feet from my garlic-laden dinner, chatting cheerfully about her day, while I sat frozen in confusion. This was the woman who claimed she needed to leave our house when I so much as opened a jar of pasta sauce that might contain garlic powder. The woman who carried an EpiPen specifically for her garlic allergy. The woman who had made me feel like a thoughtless monster for 3 years. And here she was, practically bathing in the aroma of my curry like it was aromatherapy. I barely heard what she was saying. My mind was racing, replaying every dinner, every careful accommodation, every time I'd watched her push food around her plate with that long-suffering expression. Had I imagined her reactions? Was I losing my mind? Patricia? I interrupted her mid-sentence about her book club. Are you feeling okay? No throat tightness or anything? She looked at me with mild confusion. Why would I feel throat tightness? Because of the garlic, the smell. You always say. Oh. She laughed and waved her hand again. Don't be silly. I'm not eating it. The problems only happen when I actually consume garlic. But that wasn't true. That wasn't true at all. I had 3 years of evidence to the contrary. I'd seen her react to the smell of garlic bread baking. I'd watched her excuse herself from the kitchen when I was sautéing garlic for pasta sauce. She'd literally told me just 2 weeks ago that walking past the Italian seasoning aisle at the grocery store had triggered a reaction. I spent the rest of her visit in a daze, nodding at appropriate intervals while she chattered on about neighborhood gossip. But my mind was elsewhere, turning over every interaction, every meal, every careful accommodation I'd made for her supposed allergy. After she left, I sat alone with my now cold curry and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Maybe her allergy was inconsistent? Maybe some days were better than others? Maybe the medications she took sometimes helped manage her reactions? But even as I tried to rationalize it, a darker possibility was creeping into my thoughts. What if there was no allergy at all? The idea seemed too horrible to consider. Who would fake a food allergy for 3 years? What possible reason could she have for putting me through all that stress and extra work? For making every family meal an exercise in anxiety and accommodation? I spent the next few days in a strange state of hyper-awareness, watching Patricia more carefully than I ever had before. At Sunday dinner, I made my usual 2 versions of everything, regular food for Mark and me, garlic-free alternatives for her. But this time, I paid close attention to her reactions. When I brought out the regular garlic bread, she didn't immediately start sniffling or dabbing at her eyes. In fact, she didn't react at all until she seemed to notice that I was watching her. Then, as if remembering her role, she began the familiar performance, the slight cough, the tissue dabbing, the martyred sigh. Oh dear, I should probably move away from that, she said, but she made no actual move to change seats. I brought out her special garlic-free bread with a smile that felt like plastic on my face. This batch is completely safe for you. She examined it with her usual theatrical scrutiny, breaking off a small piece and chewing it thoughtfully. It's lovely, dear, but I think I'm detecting just a hint of something. Did you use the same cutting board you used for the regular bread? No, I said, my voice perfectly level. "I used the special cutting board I bought just for your meals. And I washed it with a special soap. And I used the dedicated utensils." She took another tentative bite. "Well, maybe it's just me. My sensitivity has been particularly high lately. I think I'll just stick to the salad tonight." I watched her push the bread aside, bread I'd spent an hour making specifically for her, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This was the pattern. Always. No matter how careful I was, no matter how much extra effort I put in, there was always some reason why my cooking wasn't quite suitable for her delicate system. But now I was wondering if the problem wasn't my cooking at all. The opportunity to test my growing suspicions came 2 weeks later. Mark had to fly to Denver for a conference, and Patricia had volunteered to keep me company while he was away. Normally, this would have filled me with dread. 3 days of walking on eggshells around her supposed allergy, 3 days of double cooking everything. But this time, I saw it as an opportunity. On Thursday evening, I suggested we try the new Italian place that had opened downtown. Patricia immediately began shaking her head. "Oh, I couldn't, dear. You know Italian restaurants are impossible for me. All that garlic in everything." "Actually," I said carefully, I called ahead and spoke to the chef. He said he could prepare several dishes completely garlic-free. They're very accommodating for food allergies. She seemed to consider this, and I could see her calculating. Refusing outright might seem too suspicious, but agreeing meant potentially being caught in her lie. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose we could try. But I'll need to be very careful about what I order." The restaurant was lovely, dimly lit with soft jazz playing and the warm smell of bread and wine in the air. I watched Patricia carefully as we were seated, but she showed no signs of distress from the presumably garlic-heavy atmosphere. When the waiter brought complimentary bread with olive oil and what was obviously garlic butter for dipping, I held my breath. Surely, this would trigger the reaction I'd seen so many times at my own dinner table. But Patricia just smiled pleasantly and pushed the garlic butter to my side of the table. "You go ahead, dear. I'll just have the plain bread. No coughing. No watery eyes. No dramatic dabbing with tissues. Just a calm redistribution of condiments." I ordered a pasta dish that the waiter assured me was completely garlic-free, and Patricia ordered a simple grilled chicken with vegetables. When our food arrived, she ate with apparent enjoyment, chatting about her garden and her upcoming cruise with her book club friends. It was all perfectly normal. Too normal. "This is lovely," she said, taking another bite of her chicken. "I'm so glad you suggested coming out. I was getting tired of cooking for just myself." "The atmosphere is nice too." I agreed, then added casually, "Though I'm surprised you're comfortable here with all the garlic they must be using in the kitchen. Usually you're so sensitive to even the smell." Patricia paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "Well," she said slowly, "they must have very good ventilation systems here. Professional kitchens often do." It was a reasonable explanation. Almost believable. But I noticed she avoided making eye contact when she said it. We finished our meal without incident, and I began to wonder if I'd been imagining things. Maybe her allergy really was inconsistent. Maybe I was being paranoid and unfair, looking for problems where none existed. But then, as we were walking to the car, Patricia's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. "Oh, that's annoying. My book club dinner tomorrow night got moved to Romano's." Romano's? I knew the place, a small family-owned Italian restaurant known for its authentic, traditional recipes. "Will that be a problem for you? With your allergy?" Patricia shrugged. "Oh, I'll make do. I always manage." I stared at her. "But, Patricia, Romano's is famous for their garlic. They use it in almost everything. Remember when Mark and I went there for our anniversary, and I couldn't even wear my dress afterward because it smelled so strongly of garlic?" "Well, yes, but I can always just order very carefully," she said, unlocking her car. "And I'll take an antihistamine beforehand, just in case." I felt like I was in an alternate reality. This was the woman who claimed she couldn't be in the same room as garlic bread, who said the smell alone could trigger anaphylaxis, who carried an EpiPen specifically for her garlic sensitivity. And she was planning to eat at a restaurant that basically marinated everything in garlic? Are you sure that's safe? I pressed. Maybe you should suggest a different restaurant? I'm sure your book club would understand. Patricia was already getting into her car. Don't worry about me, dear. I've been managing this allergy longer than you've known me. I know what I can and can't handle. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Patricia slept peacefully in our guest room. Nothing about this made sense anymore. Her reactions at my dinners versus her casual attitude about eating at Romano's. Her dramatic distress over the smell of my cooking versus her complete comfort at the Italian restaurant. The way she seemed to remember and forget her limitations depending on the situation. I thought about calling Mark, but what would I say? Honey, I think your mother might be faking her allergy. It sounded crazy, even in my own head. Mark would think I was looking for reasons to dislike his mother, creating drama where none existed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being manipulated. That for 3 years, I'd been jumping through hoops for no reason other than Patricia's. What? Need for attention? Desire to control our household? Some twisted way of asserting dominance over her son's wife. Friday evening came, and Patricia left for her book club dinner at Romano's with a cheerful wave and no apparent anxiety about spending several hours in what should have been, for her, a toxic environment. I had the house to myself, and I found myself unable to concentrate on anything. I kept thinking about all the meals I'd ruined trying to accommodate her. All the times I'd felt like a failure because my garlic-free attempts weren't good enough. All the money I'd spent on special ingredients and separate cookware. Around 9 o'clock, I decided to drive past Romano's. I told myself I was just going to the grocery store, and Romano's happened to be on the way, but I knew I was lying. I wanted to see if Patricia's car was still there. I wanted to see if she'd actually gone through with eating at a restaurant that should have been off-limits for someone with her supposed sensitivity. Her car was in the parking lot. Through the large front windows, I could see the book club women seated at a round table in the center of the restaurant. And there was Patricia, gesticulating animatedly as she told some story, a plate of what looked like pasta with red sauce in front of her. I parked across the street and watched. She was eating. Actually eating, not just picking at her food or pushing it around her plate. She took bite after bite, laughed with her friends, raised her wine glass in a toast. She looked relaxed and happy and completely unaffected by being surrounded by what should have been her allergen. I sat in my car for over an hour, watching this woman who had made me feel incompetent and careless for 3 years eat what was undoubtedly a garlic-heavy meal with apparent relish. When the book club finally left the restaurant, Patricia was still chatting and laughing, showing no signs of the distress that a few molecules of garlic in my kitchen supposedly caused her. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. There was no denying what I'd seen. No rationalizing it away. Patricia didn't have a garlic allergy. She'd been lying to me, to all of us for years. But why? What possible reason could she have for such an elaborate, long-term deception? When she came home an hour later, I was waiting in the living room with a cup of tea, trying to look casual. "How was dinner?" I asked. "Oh, lovely," she said, settling into the armchair across from me. "We had such a nice time. The food was wonderful, too." "What did you have?" She paused for just a beat too long. "Just a simple grilled fish with vegetables. Very plain but tasty." "That sounds nice," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "No problems with her allergy?" "None at all. Like I said, I know how to manage it." I stared at her, this woman who could lie so smoothly to my face, who had just spent the evening eating what I'd seen with my own eyes was pasta with red sauce, not grilled fish, who had put me through 3 years of elaborate accommodations for a condition that didn't exist. "Patricia," I said slowly, "can I ask you something?" She looked up from removing her earrings. "Of course, dear. When did your garlic allergy develop? I mean, was it something you had as a child, or did it come on later in life?" Another pause. Another moment of calculation behind her eyes. "Oh, it started in my 40s, she said. just gradually got worse over the years. These things can develop at any time, you know. And you've been tested for it? By a doctor, I mean? Well, not specifically tested, no. But the symptoms are quite clear. My doctor said testing wasn't necessary when the cause was so obvious. I nodded as if this made perfect sense, but my heart was pounding. Every word out of her mouth was making it worse. No testing. No medical confirmation. Just her own assertion that she had a life-threatening allergy that conveniently made every family meal revolve around her needs. "I'm going to head to bed," she said, standing up. "Thank you for a lovely evening, dear. Good night, Patricia." I sat alone in my living room for a long time after she went upstairs, trying to figure out what to do with this knowledge. Mark would be home Sunday evening, and I knew I had to tell him what I'd discovered. But how do you tell someone that their mother has been deceiving their entire family for years? Saturday passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I made breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all carefully garlic-free, as always, while Patricia chatted pleasantly about her plans for the day. She was going shopping with a friend, then to her nephew's birthday party. Just a normal day for a woman with no food allergies whatsoever. When she left for the birthday party, she mentioned that it was being held at an Italian restaurant. "Another Italian place?" I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "Are you sure that's wise?" She shrugged. "It's what my nephew chose. I'll just have to be extra careful." After she left, I finally called Mark. He was between conference sessions, and I could hear the noise of the hotel lobby in the background. "Hey, babe. How are things going with Mom?" "Mark," I said, then stopped. "How do you start this conversation?" "Mark, I need to talk to you about something important when you get home." "Is everything okay? Is Mom all right?" "She's fine. We're both fine. It's just there's something we need to discuss. About your mother's allergy." "What about it? Has she had a reaction? Do you need me to come home early?" "No, nothing like that. Just, we need to talk when you get back, okay?" I could hear the concern in his voice. "Sarah, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I can't explain it over the phone. But Mark, I need you to trust me on this. Something isn't right." We hung up with him promising to call me later, and me promising to keep his mother safe until he returned. I spent the rest of the day rehearsing different ways to tell him what I discovered, but none of them sounded anything but crazy. Sunday morning, Patricia was her usual cheerful self, showing no ill effects from her evening at yet another Italian restaurant. She made coffee and chatted about the birthday party while I tried to act normal. "The food was actually quite good," she said. "I had a lovely pasta primavera. The chef was very accommodating about leaving the garlic out of my dish." I stared at her over my coffee cup. "He made a special garlic-free version just for you?" "Oh yes, these professional chefs are usually very good about food allergies once you explain the situation." She was still lying, still maintaining the fiction, even when it was just the two of us. Even when she had to know that her story was becoming increasingly unbelievable. Mark came home Sunday evening, tired from his flight, but eager to hear about whatever had me so concerned. Patricia was in her room packing her things, giving us a few minutes alone. "So what's this about?" he asked, settling onto the couch beside me. I took a deep breath. "Mark, I think your mother has been lying about her garlic allergy." He stared at me. "What do you mean?" I told him everything. The incident with my Indian takeout. Her casual attitude at the Italian restaurant. Her plan to eat at Romano's with her book club. What I'd seen when I drove past the restaurant. The inconsistencies in her story about when and how her allergy developed. Mark listened without interrupting, but I could see the disbelief growing on his face. "Sarah," he said finally, "that's a pretty serious accusation. You're saying my mother has been faking a medical condition for 3 years? Why would she do that?" "I don't know why. But Mark, I saw her. I saw her eating pasta at Romano's, laughing and enjoying herself. No reaction. No distress, nothing. Maybe she took medication beforehand. Maybe she's learned to manage it better." I could hear the defensiveness creeping into his voice, and I knew I was losing him. Then why does she still react so dramatically to my cooking? Why can she eat at any restaurant she wants, but my garlic-free bread still isn't safe enough for her? Mark ran his hands through his hair. I don't know, Sarah. Maybe you're not as careful as you think you are. Maybe there's cross-contamination. For 3 years, Mark. I've been cross-contaminating everything for 3 years, but professional chefs can accommodate her just fine. We were interrupted by Patricia coming downstairs with her overnight bag. Ready to head home, she said cheerfully, then noticed our expressions. Is everything all right? Mark and I looked at each other. I could see the conflict in his face, loyalty to his mother warring with the evidence I'd presented. Mom, he said slowly, Sarah has some concerns about your allergy. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. Oh, what kind of concerns? She seems to think. Mark struggled with the words. She thinks you might not actually be allergic to garlic. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia looked back and forth between us, and I watched as several emotions crossed her face. Surprise, calculation, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. I see, she said quietly. Mom, that's ridiculous, right? Tell her that's ridiculous. But Patricia didn't immediately deny it. She set down her bag and sank into the armchair across from us. How long have you suspected? She asked me. My heart stopped. What? How long have you known? Mark stared at his mother in shock. Mom, what are you saying? Patricia looked down at her hands. For the first time in 3 years, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. I don't have a garlic allergy, she said quietly. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Mark seemed to shrink into the couch cushions. What? He whispered. I don't have a garlic allergy. I never have. But Mom, why? Why would you lie about something like that? Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and when she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. Because I felt invisible, she said. After your father died, after you got married, I felt like I didn't matter anymore. Like I was just this extra person that you had to include out of obligation. That's not true, Mark started, but she held up a hand. Let me finish. When I first mentioned being sensitive to garlic, and it started as just not liking the taste, nothing more, you both were so attentive. So concerned. Sarah started cooking special meals for me, and you started checking with me before choosing restaurants. For the first time in years, I felt important. Like my comfort mattered. I felt sick. So, you just kept lying? It got out of hand, Patricia admitted. What started as not liking garlic became being sensitive to it, which became being allergic, which became having severe reactions. Every time you two accommodated me, every time you went out of your way to make me comfortable, I felt loved. And I was terrified that if I admitted the truth, you'd stop caring about my needs altogether. Mark was staring at his mother like he'd never seen her before. Mom, do you have any idea what you've put Sarah through? What you've put us both through? I know, she whispered. I know it was wrong. But Sarah, you were so good at it. So caring and thoughtful. You never made me feel like a burden, even when I was being difficult about the food. I felt like you really cared about me. I did care about you, I exploded, 3 years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. I spent hours researching garlic-free recipes. I bought special ingredients and cookware. I had anxiety attacks before every family dinner because I was terrified of accidentally making you sick. I cared so much that I was making myself crazy trying to be perfect for you. Patricia was crying now. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go so far. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me, I said, surprised by how raw my voice sounded. You made me feel incompetent and careless. You made me doubt myself constantly. Do you know how many times I wondered if I was a terrible daughter-in-law because I couldn't get your meals right? Mark stood up abruptly and walked to the window. I can't believe this, he said to the glass. 3 years, Mom. 3 years of lies. I wanted to tell you, Patricia said. So many times I wanted to confess, but I was afraid you'd both hate me. Instead of what? Mark turned around, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Instead of lying to us every day, instead of making Sarah feel like she was failing, instead of manipulating our entire family dynamic around a fake medical condition. The three of us sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Patricia spoke again. "What happens now?" she asked. Mark and I looked at each other. Honestly, I had no idea. How do you move forward from something like this? How do you rebuild trust that has been so thoroughly shattered? "I think," Mark said slowly, "you need to leave. And we all need some time to figure out what comes next." Patricia nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I understand." She gathered her things and headed for the door, then turned back. "For what it's worth," she said, "I do love you both. And Sarah, you're an incredible cook. Every meal you made for me was delicious, even the garlic-free ones." After she left, Mark and I sat in our living room in stunned silence. 3 years of our marriage had been shaped by a lie. 3 years of extra work, extra stress, extra consideration for a need that had never existed. "I'm sorry," Mark said finally. "You didn't know." I should have questioned it more. Some of her reactions seemed over the top, but I just thought she's my mother, you know? Why would she lie about something like that? I understood. Family loyalty runs deep, and we want to trust the people we love. But I was also angry at Patricia for her deception, at Mark for not seeing what now seemed obvious, and at myself for being so accommodating that I'd enabled this charade. The hardest part wasn't the wasted time or effort. It wasn't even the money spent on special ingredients and equipment. The hardest part was realizing that Patricia had been willing to let me torture myself with guilt and anxiety for years just to feel more important in our lives. It's been 6 months since that confrontation. Patricia and I have had several long, difficult conversations about trust, manipulation, and the difference between wanting attention and needing care. She started therapy to work on her feelings of invisibility and her unhealthy ways of seeking validation. Mark and I have had our own conversations about boundaries, honesty, and how to rebuild our relationship with his mother. It's been hard work, but we're slowly finding our way back to something that feels genuine. Patricia still comes to family dinners, but the dynamic is completely different now. I cook whatever I want to cook, with as much garlic as the recipe calls for. She eats it and tells me honestly what she thinks of it. Sometimes she loves it, sometimes she doesn't, but her reactions are real now. The strange thing is, I think we're closer now than we ever were before. When she compliments my cooking, I know she means it. When she asks for a recipe, I know it's because she actually wants to make it. When she tells me she appreciates the effort I put into our family meals, I believe her. Trust, once broken, is incredibly hard to rebuild. But at least now we're building it on a foundation of truth instead of elaborate fiction. And, honestly, my garlic bread has never tasted better. TLDR, my mother-in-law claimed to have a severe garlic allergy for 3 years, forcing me to cook everything twice and making me feel constantly anxious about accidentally poisoning her. I discovered she was lying when I saw her happily eating garlic-heavy pasta at an Italian restaurant with her book club. When confronted, she admitted she faked the allergy because it made her feel important and cared for after feeling invisible following her husband's death and her son's marriage. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship based on honesty rather than manipulation.